Alright, so it's finally here. After we've went through the whole annual vacant couple of weeks at the end of August as far as new releases go, it's finally the movie I was really waiting for the most this year, apart from the Tarantino movie, obviously, where we're finally getting the ending of it that we started with the movie from a couple years ago in 2017, where we heard like what felt like forever ago when they were finally going to do a big screen adaptation of this and the whole doing the two different movies thing, and we kind of thought that that was something that wasn't really going to happen. It seemed like when Cary Fukunaga was initially on as like director, and it was something that we just kind of, I get a lot of us had just gotten cynical and we just assumed that that was never going to happen. It just seemed too good to be true. And then even though Fukunaga got taken off that movie, even though he was credited as a writer on that one, and not this one, and that may show sometimes, it's still amazing to have this. And Andy Muschietti, I think is how you say it. Every time somebody says it, I hear it said a different way, but I think I heard him say himself that it was that. So did obviously amazing things with the first movie, and it was one of my favorite movies of that year, and sort of set a bar for horror movies, I think, as far as just the way it's able to do like the sort of tropes you expect in a horror movie with the jump scares and stuff like that, but really went into the human element that you find in the book. And it was able to make it a mainstream thing, which when you hear they're adapting that book as faithfully as they can, you don't really imagine mainstream movie, except for maybe the horror elements, but they did, through both of these, really manage to capture a lot of what's in the book, a lot of which may seem unfilmable. So yeah, so just before we even go into this, it's like it's amazing that we have this at all. So going into this one, and I had heard going in, kind of at the last minute, that a lot of people were getting underwhelmed by it, and there was a lot of it's not near as good as the first, which would have been a hard, bar to top. But at the same time, it's like it really feels like they should kind of go together as one, and you do get a sense that this one probably has a slightly different feel than the other one, despite being the same director and one of the writers and a lot of the returning cast and all that. But before we even go into that, the whole opening scene with Adrian Mellon, and while one thing that did stand out pretty quickly was there was something like this. I tried to take those what little I had heard of the criticisms out of my head before going in, but I did feel kind of instantly that there was like because when you saw the first movie for the first time, there was like an instant atmosphere to it, and the way it didn't start off immediately with the horror, where it was like the melancholy score and the rain, and then we were introduced to Bill and George and all that, and it's like there was just something so instantaneous about that feel when the first movie just started immediately, and in this one that feeling isn't quite here. That atmosphere isn't there like immediately, or as immediately. But still, it's just kind of having read the book like first in my childhood and then now, and then it's like seeing all this stuff I would have never thought I would actually see translated to a movie, or if they did make a movie of this, a lot of it would be cut out. It's just sort of surreal seeing the Adrian Mellon storyline in like a mainstream movie, and so in a movie that's gonna make a shitload of money too. It's kind of insane. But then as it goes on, we kind of get into the flow of it. Maybe it moves a little too quickly when we're reintroducing the losers and they're getting the phone calls. Like, it's one of those cases where you kind of hope they linger on it just a little longer, but then again, the movie is almost 3 hours, and it's like, we do go, if you've read the book, you go in with the knowledge of the book, so you, like, know all not just the backstories of these characters, but, like, the whole backstories of the random people in their life that don't really matter in the full picture of this story. But so maybe that's just a case of, if somebody's seeing this as not a book reader, it won't seem so cut down when we're being introduced to them seemingly so quickly. But they still managed to do something cool with this, where we get like the different transitions to each character that's really well done, and kind of makes it feel like this sort of cohesive flow thing as we go from one to the other, because we do have 7 characters introduced, which is a lot. So you can get where they kind of had to speed it up, but still, I do like it enough. And some of the stuff they were able to throw in there, like the whole idea that Eddie married that woman Myra, and it's said that she's basically he practically married his mother the same way Bev pretty much married her father with Tom Rogan. But the thing here is, I believe it's the same actress playing both Myra and Eddie's mom. So that's an interesting detail. Like, I'm glad they didn't go like the full thing and have like the guy that played Bev's dad also play Tom. But there's just something so fitting about the way Myra and Sonia Kasperak are represented. Um, and then when they all kind of start meeting again, we do have the callbacks to the first movie that don't feel too overbearing. That could be something that feels maybe a bit too redundant. It's like, yes, we know we saw the first movie. You don't need to tell us, but something how it's like the way they do it makes it feel like, instead of just it being there as almost to say, hey, we're reminding the audience in case they didn't watch the first one recently. It does feel more like we're just seeing the sudden memories of the characters. And there was something really heartwarming about when Ben and Bev met again, and it's like we got the flashback of the two of them when she signed his yearbook, which ended up being something that he carried the way she carried the poster, which I thought was a nice detail. But the way he used the line, like, is there a password, when she was standing in front of the door of the restaurant, which is the very first thing she ever said to him when they first, not just in the first movie, but when they first met, period. So I thought that was really, yeah, that was really nice, and kind of gives you that whole thing of knowing where they end up if you know the story. Um, I'm probably just gonna go into all the spoilers, which will probably be in the title there, so just so that's clear. And then we get the Chinese restaurant scene early. Um, not it does feel like we're like if you know the story in a certain way, it may feel like it's moving way too fast at the start, where we get all the introductions, and then we get Stan's suicide, and we get the Henry Bowers introduction, like right when we get the others, and that does almost seem like maybe a cleaner way to do it. Just introduce all of the adult characters, like, just all in one go. Though I do kind of like the way the story typically goes, where Henry Bowers just kind of pops up in the middle of this. But I can see from like a filmmaking standpoint where it's like it's just cleaner to get all the introductions out of the way and then let everything go. Um, so this is when we get one of the first instances, one of the first of many, where it does seem to be there's a certain portion of it. They also did this with the new Pet Cemetery earlier this year, where they have things that everybody knows, and particularly book readers know, and they have the setup, and then it's either there'll be some sort of fake out where it's not quite that thing it once was in the other adaptations or the book, or it will be that thing, and then they'll elaborate on it in a bigger way, and they do that. They do both of those things with the fortune cookie scene, where they open up each fortune cookie and it's the message about Stan. And we sort of think, oh, that's an interesting take on the fortune cookies, and it's like, all right, it's obviously not as grand as what happened in the book, but still, in the miniseries for that matter. But okay, this is kind of cool too, because it really sets in the fear of this is the way they find out something happened to Stan. But no, that's just the setup. Then we get the fortune cookie scene we're expecting. But they got a little more creative with it. This is one of the first instances also where we realized that the CGI is not going to be perfect, which might be a problem. But still, it's still easy to appreciate like the designs and what the whole idea is. And some of these things that are unidentifiable, like the monster that's kind of comes out of the first fortune cookie that's built like kind of a fat scorpion but's got a baby screaming head on it, whatever the hell that is. But that's the kind of stuff where it's like, yeah, because it almost seemed too simple when the fortune cookies just like had bugs and like pus in them and blood or whatever. That they sort of went all out on this and was like, let's just do some of the most fucked up shit we can come up with, even if it doesn't make sense. And some of it does, like the bird being there. Once again, I just talked about in the second part of the miniseries video yesterday about how it's a callback to the way Mike was terrorized in the book that hasn't been touched on either the movie or the miniseries. And then once the fortune cookies really start to get out of control, then they take it again that extra mile, and where they start seeing the heads and the tanks. And it's like the way the scene just gets really out of control up to the point that Mike has to destroy the table. I do like the way how it's sort of like, it started off with us thinking, oh, the fortune cookie scene's not going to get too crazy. It's just a message about Stan, and then it turns into that. So it starts off like something smaller than we think it's going to be, then it ends up bigger. And I think that's a really cool way to go and a way to show, to kind of toy with expectations to the people that think they know what they're expecting. So that's really cool that they would take those measures, even if there are people that don't like liberties taken in regards to like book adaptations. I think stuff like this is kind of cool where they can do both at the same time. So, yes, and then we do get... It almost seems like the movie... There are a few instances where the movie seems to be addressing criticism, previous criticisms, whether it be of King himself or the previous movie even. Where I noticed the scene under the bleachers, which is basically like the Georgie scene of this movie, where he lures the girl down there during that baseball game, and he the way he sort of lures her into the darkness, and it's as we saw, a lot of people criticize the Georgie scene because it's like, I know he's a kid and everything, but he should not be this stupid. He should know that thing is a threat, no matter what it looks like or what it's saying, because it's lurking in the darkness. So sure enough, the first thing the girl says when she sees him is, I'm not going near you because you're scary looking and you're in the dark. And then the way he has to like lure her in a way we haven't seen, where like his usual shtick of, hey, I'm a clown, so I'm safe, he has to like sort of elaborate on and do the whole thing where he lures her in saying, oh, I'm just like you, I'm an outcast. Which makes the scene even more brutal and disturbing, because it's like, in Georgie's case, it's almost like, oh, he was too stupid to realize that was a threat. But in the girl's case, it's like she was smart enough to know, but then he manipulated her and got her trust and tried to make it seem like there was somebody that related to her when she felt alone. And it's like, but it's already brutal enough before the kill even happens, and the fact that we pretty much see the kill is the case. Like we get that feeling again that we got in the first movie when we actually saw George bleeding out of his arm after it was bitten off, where you're like, oh, okay, so they're still not fucking around. They will do that, and that's obviously not even the only time this happens in this movie. So going on that, also talking about, I guess, children, there's the whole thing about us getting some more flashbacks of when they were still kids, which there is some technology here, and I've heard some people say that they think it looks pretty seamless, and there's a lot of people that say it's not seamless at all. The fact that if you've seen the actors who played the kids in the first movie, they're a little bit more grown up now, and the movie had to kind of try to digitally adjust that. And I think there were some prosthetic use from what I heard also, particularly from Jeremy Taylor. So the thing about this is that there are times they also use deleted scenes in some instances, like the scene with Stan at his bar mitzvah where Richie's there cheering him on was a deleted scene on the Blu-ray for the first movie. And when I saw that deleted scene, it was like, wow, I really wish that had been... Pretty much all the deleted scenes in the first movie, I was like, I wish those had actually been in the movie, because they do add a little more, and they really gave Stan a moment to shine in that moment, and ended up getting cut out. But the way they're able to incorporate those, it's funny that this is the second movie this year that is a sequel that has James McAvoy in it that incorporated deleted scenes from the previous movie into the sequel, because Glass did the same thing with Unbreakable. But when they weren't using deleted scenes, yeah, we had the de-aging stuff, which it didn't. I mean, I don't think it takes away too much, but I mean, you can tell. Like there's the point in time when we get Jack Dylan Grazer's flashback, who plays Eddie when he's in like the basement. And it's like there's so many shots where you can tell he's much taller than he was. Kind of a few of them have that problem where you can tell they're much taller than they were. And also like the first scene, like the first real flashback we get when they're in the clubhouse. It's like you can also tell because a lot of their voices have deepened also that their voices had to be altered, and you can tell there's like a distance between their body and their voice that you can tell. So I would say it's far from seamless, but I think it's still just the characters are still the characters enough, and we still love them as much as we did before. That you can just kind of get used to it. I think so. There is that. And there's also the idea of I like the idea because you think about how they're going to incorporate flashbacks because it's like, well, how's this gonna put stuff in here that was never addressed in the first movie yet apparently happened within the first movie and we just didn't see it. And they do the thing where it's like the whole breakup scene in the first movie. When they came out of the house on Neville Street and they all went their separate ways after Bill and Richie got into that fight. And it's like, oh yeah, they were all doing their own thing, and it's like, yeah, I guess it's not like they were just not terrorized in that time. Of course they were. So that's what the scenes are in this, and that makes that it's interesting how well that lined up. So yeah, and it also works, I think, because it's stuff that obviously happened within the timeline of the first movie, but is never addressed in it. So when you go back and watch the first movie now, I feel like it means like because when they come back to Derry and their memories are like slowly having to come back to them because they're like practically erased when it's almost like a supernatural thing how they're erased as they left and then when they return when they come back. So it's like it almost feels like when we see the first movie now knowing that these scenes happened, that they're never acknowledged. It's like it'll be like watching a fractured memory when you watch the first movie, like how it's like the way they remember some stuff but not everything. So I'm interested to see like watching the first movie again how that'll feel now that we know like all this shit in all these segments was going on also and we just didn't know about it at the time. Um, so that's great, and then obviously we've got each one gets their individual thing as they go and do the because we are getting the ritual of food in this one, kind of. So they all each have they just instead of just having I believe in the book it was just Mike saying just go and get a feel of it, and then we'll each have to experience it before we come back, so they can all so that we're all in the same place and all that stuff. So now they've done this whole thing where they have to get the individual thing to do the ritual. I don't remember that being in the book. It might have been, but like I said, there's so much in the books. It's not all in here, but so yeah. So starting with the Mrs. Kirsch scene, I do really love. I also talked about yesterday with the miniseries how I didn't feel like as well executed as I thought it was in the miniseries. It still felt like there was kind of an absence of build up to it. So the thing about that is we do sort of get that, and it's because we do kind of get the eerie vibe of it when she answers the door. Period. And then it seems kind of normal when she's in there, and then she has the time to go in there and get the postcard hidden in the wall and all that. It's kind of had time to set in that she's in the house. We get the flashback with her dad, the really weird flashback with her dad, which kind of sets the mood as it is, and then we get into the Mrs. Gross stuff as we know it. Only it does get a little crazier. It's always one of those cases we learned in the projector scene in the first movie when Pennywise goes unexpectedly large, much larger than himself. It reminds me of in the miniseries when Eddie has his first memory of Pennywise and he imagines him being 75 feet tall, which is perfect because it's that whole sort of from a child's perspective sort of thing. So it's like even in their adulthood, they're not safe from him towering over them the way he did when they were children. So even more so with the projector scene when they were still children, he was still doing that shit. But yeah, so it makes more sense thematically here. And then we get Bill going to get silver at a pawn shop, as he does in the book. And there's the sudden Stephen King cameo calling. Not only does the movie spend time calling him out, but he gets to call himself out too. Because obviously, it did feel a bit on the nose, just a little bit, that the running joke is that Bill is, the author. Which obviously, in a lot of Stephen King's books, his protagonists are authors. But in this particular case, it was like when they, in the miniseries, when they had all the knockoff titles of Stephen King books that were the names of Bill's books. And now they've gone so far as to the fact that Bill gets criticized because all of his endings suck, which is the criticism that King has always faced since the beginning of time. And even King himself gets to say to his face, your endings suck. And so, which is great that he has that sense of humor and sort of that playfulness about his criticisms. But there's also that moment too where it's I've been wondering if I've been saying Bill's name right, because it's like whenever I read the book, I pronounced it in my head Denbrow, and then I think in all the other adaptations everybody has said Denbrow, but when King himself speaks, he calls him Dembro. And I'm wondering if that's King's character intentionally mispronouncing it, or if that's King telling us that we've all been pronouncing it wrong. But either way, that's funny regardless. And then we have when Richie is terrorized. This is another one of those scenes that I kind of thought we'd never see on screen. And that was his Paul Bunyan flashback. With the giant statue that we did get a glimpse of in the first movie. So I probably should have known it was coming here, but at the same time, it's like, but how are they going to do that without it looking a bit silly? And they found their way to do it. They found their way to use the Paul Bunyan scare, but make it in line with the other scares they do in both of these movies. And just really go all out and do their own thing. And make him like really, really monstrous. And it surprisingly works. It's probably something that shouldn't work, but it does. And it works in the novel because of the way it's described and like the way we just have to visualize it. And then it's like to the point that Richie thinks he's dreaming. And then to see it this way, it's like this was probably the way to do it if you were going to translate it to screen and make it look the way that it does. I also love that image of Pennywise floating through the air and like floating down to him with the pyramid of balloons again. With the whole it's something about Pennywise with his dancing and his musical numbers that just randomly happen. One in each movie now. But yeah, I feel like I like the idea of that scene better than how it actually looked, come to think of it. But the image of him still floating down, though, is one that I really, really love also. So, yeah, and then we get Eddie, as I was talking about, going through that basement of the pharmacy. And one thing I really liked here, for starters, was there is a cameo here. There's the King cameo. There's the Peter Bogdanovich cameo as the director of Bill's movie. Another thing that just really sort of blew my mind when I saw it, and I kind of had to really look to make sure. I'm pretty sure the guy in Ben's office at the very beginning that he's having the conversation with through the computer is Brandon Crane, who played the child version of Ben in the miniseries. It's like that's of all the people that were in the miniseries that could have cameoed in this, I wouldn't have thought of him, but that was kind of, and especially in Ben's introduction, it's like it's just kind of perfect. But yeah, the other cameo is the director himself, that you can see over Eddie's shoulder when he comes into the pharmacy, which is hilarious because if you've seen the first movie as many times as I have, you'll remember that we get pretty much that exact same shot of young Eddie coming into the pharmacy when he learns the placebo thing, and there he is again over his shoulder. He's standing in like the exact same spot in both scenes, so that's funny. And then we have the Ben scene, which is new, if I'm remembering correctly, which is Pennywise really getting to him by using Bev to get to him, which I think is kind of wonderfully sadistic on his part. And they somehow found a way to put Kiss Me Fat Boy in this movie, which I was not expecting at all. That's one of the few things I would have thought they wouldn't bring back. But yeah, and just obviously in a completely different way, and it was the adults in the miniseries. It's the same thing where he's used Bev as a way to sort of but the thing I like about this is that there's no question in Ben's mind, even when he's a child. Like when he hides in the locker after all that stuff has happened, when he's Pennywise has taken over Bev and she said, I'm never going to be with a fat kid like you. He just immediately says Bev wouldn't say that. And it's like I said, there's the Ben and Bev thing here doesn't get a shitload of spotlight, but when it's there, I think it really works well, and they really hit the points home just enough to where it's great when they end up at their ultimate place together. Um, and there's also something that kind of struck me as funny was once you realize where the scene's going. When she initially sat down and he was listening to his music, New Kids on the Block, obviously, and she names off the first names of all the new kids as like saying they're his friends. And it's like, so I guess that means that Pennywise knows all the names of the members of New Kids on the Block, which is hilarious in itself. But regardless, yeah, there's all that stuff. So then we get an extra thing going on with Bill. We do get the scene with the skateboard kid that we got in the novel, and they do it two different things here, which I like, because I really liked it the way it was in the novel, where it was just like a casual run in, and that kid just kind of never came back, but the words that he said to Bill like just danced around in his head for the rest of the story, and he kind of like went by them. But here, the kid actually becomes, like, sort of a major character, and he's introduced at the Chinese restaurant, so we know he's going to kind of be important the way he keeps popping back up. And then it kind of turns into this whole thing of Bill can potentially get redemption for his guilt, for what he feels to be sending Georgie out to his death. So once he's warned by Pennywise, it's like he's given the chance to save this kid, hence save Georgie in a sense, in his mind anyway. And the fact that it doesn't work out that way, it kind of goes back to the first scene in this movie where a child is killed, and you just sort of get that sense of like the helplessness of and nobody's off limits. And it's like, so you think, okay, they've already killed one kid in this movie, surely they're not going to kill a second. And they also can't kill him because this is Bill's redemption moment, right? Once again, not only does the child die, but it is a lot more brutal and on-screen than you think it might be. I mean, we don't see, like, in graphic detail, but we see enough that it's, like, there was an audible "oh" from a few people in the theater, and for good reason. So yeah, even when it's, like, sometimes when they set it up, and you get this sense of, whoa, nobody's off limits, and it's like, oh, they're not fucking around. Oftentimes movies don't live up to that. It's like they just wanted to pull you in and then they just go about their way the rest of the way. But no, this is really late in the movie, so it's like, nope, we are still, even after Georgie's death and now after the girl on the bleacher's death, we're this far into the story, and no, we're still not fucking around. So, and that's pretty much, is, if I remember correctly, takes us into the climax. But obviously the side thing going on here, the Henry Bowers storyline, and this is another case of they don't really explain in this movie the whole thing about bringing. I mean, it's something you probably could put together even if you didn't, read the book or see the miniseries. But the idea that Pennywise goes to Henry and lures him out through the facade of his dead friends, his dead decomposing friends. That's something I don't think the movie ever touched on. The deleted scene from the first movie when it's revealed that he killed Belch and Victor before he went into the house on Newbold Street. I really thought that was going to be addressed in this, but I don't think it was. We just never see them again, or they're never mentioned again, because it's Hochstetter who comes for him. But okay, but as far as what I was saying is, the movie seems to not really address up front that Pennywise goes and gets Henry because he's weak, and Henry needs to put the fear back into them. Because Henry's human, he doesn't have the constraints that Pennywise does, and doesn't need the strength that he does. He can just go do it if he wants to. And so with that, I don't not fully address like up front. I can see people leaving this thinking the Henry Bowers thing might seem really pointless. But if you know that's the point, then it has its place. But that's the thing also, where they toyed with the expectations in many ways. This like sets up a whole chain of expectations of people that think they know the story kind of going off a little bit, where they reverse the Henry Bowers confrontations in the novel, where in the novel he attacks Mike, like we saw somewhat in the miniseries, happens in the townhouse there, in the library in the book. And then he goes to the townhouse, and then he attacks Eddie, and Eddie ends up killing him. Whereas in this case, it is he starts off attacking Eddie, and Eddie stabs him like he does, and typically kills him in the book. But then he goes away. Then he goes to the library, and so we've completely flipped it on its head. But then they throw another one at us, and they actually have Mike get pretty much totally saved. Where this is usually the case in the story, where Mike gets taken out of commission for the rest of the story. They're able to get they're able to humorously get to Bowers before Mike can even be injured. So we get Mike for the climax, which is something we've never had before. So yeah, this is another case of what I was talking about, where it's like we get what feels like brand new stuff, but they're still telling the story. We just kind of get to see it in a slightly different way than we usually did. And it is really fun to see Mike kind of take part in this, because he's the one where it's like, he's the one that did all the preparation, he's the one that got everything together, he's the one that's planned this all out, knows where everything is, knows what everything is. So it's like, when he gets to the point when he, like, jumps down the hole, it's like, he's, like, really excited to be doing this, and he's, like, really into it. So that's really refreshing to see, and an angle that it's, like, one of those, what if we got to see that in the book or the miniseries, and now we have it, like, what Mike would have done and how he would have reacted to things if he was part of the climax. And then there is other stuff that we think we somewhat have an idea of, but then the movie sort of takes off on its own. This one with the help of another movie, though, and that is the appearance of Stan's head in the refrigerator. I do think it's a nice callback to the first movie, that much like what Pennywise did when he approached Eddie, he's all folded up on the refrigerator like that instead of it just being his head. But I like that they took I mentioned this in the video yesterday too, that they took the approach of the book and made it child Stan's head instead of adult Stan's head, which makes something about that makes it creepier and scarier. But then they take it that extra level and they do the whole reference to The Thing. But once again, still it's, even though it's like, you can address, oh yeah, this is like, a reference to The Thing. And you would think that that would be like, the movie would use that as sort of a crutch. And it's like, oh, if you thought this scene was wild in The Thing, you'll think it's wild here. But it still does its own wild things in its own wild way with this. So especially the fact that it's child Stan's head and decomposing and all that other stuff. So it's still satisfyingly crazy. And so, yeah, and as far as, I just dropped the word scary, there was a lot of criticism I heard also going in that this one wasn't near as scary as the first one, despite the fact that the director, like, really built up that it'd be 10 times more so. But that goes into the whole argument I made when I was talking about the miniseries, where it's like, to me, it was always a story that's not really about, literally about being scary, but it's not like, for me, that's not the appeal of it. That's not the main appeal of it. Because it's all the characters here, and it's like, it depends on their individual fears and how each individual person reacts to something, whereas, like, if, one of them were to see, like, The Leper or something, they wouldn't have near the reaction to it that Eddie does, and so on. So, like I said before, as long as we are convinced that the characters are as scared as they are of those individual things, I feel like it's somewhat irrelevant for us as the audience to feel the same way. It helps a lot, and obviously, it shows that a movie does. They say that a horror movie doesn't have to be scary as long as it's well made, but there is something about. There's sort of an extra factor to how well made a horror movie is if it just happens to also be scary on top of doing all the other things in it right. So, like, whether it be atmosphere or character work or whatever that is. And yeah, so, and like I was saying about the miniseries and the book to an extent, is it feels less like because obviously Pennywise is weak at this point, and he's just now rising. He's only eaten like a few children at this point. um, so instead of like, and for them being children, it was easy to scare them because they're children. With adults, it's like he goes more for the mocking and the taunting, as opposed to trying to outright scare them, which he's also doing, but it's also more of the poking and prodding stuff, which this one seems to go along with also. So, yeah, so whether it was going to be scary or not was never even something that I was concerned about. Um, so, yeah, and then there is some of the stuff in here during the climax. You'll notice, well, I haven't really talked much about the performances. Um, which are fine. They did do the interesting choice of saying, like, there's a big build up about how, A-list the cast was going to be, given how popular and how insanely successful the first movie was. It's like, alright, we're going to get Chastain for Beverly, which we all knew because Miss Getty also did Mama. That was just a given. And then McAvoy got involved, and then Bill Hader got involved, and it's like, wow, they're really, you know, rolling this out, and then the rest are more or less unknowns. James Ransone, if you're into the indie scene, you'll remember from like Ken Park, or he was the pimp in Tangerine, stuff. The Wire. He's been around for a while, and I do recognize him quite a bit. Isaiah Mustafa is mostly known as like the Old Spice guy, and then Jay Ryan and Andy Bean are just kind of guys I don't think I had heard of or seen in anything before, unless I'm forgetting. I may be forgetting something. I did remember I researched Jay Ryan after he was cast, and the first thing I saw on his IMDb page was, by sheer coincidence, apparently before he was an actor, when he was just starting to get work, he paid the bills by being a clown at like state fairs and shit. Go figure. So yeah, so I do think Bill Hader, obviously, and Isaiah Mustafa are the real standouts here. You would think McAvoy and Chastain, being the actors that they are, and how amazing they've been in the past, would have a lot to work with here, would be standouts. But they're kind of, I mean, they do what they need to do. But it's interesting to me that they don't stand out as much as they probably could have, and especially don't stand out as much as, say, Hader or Mustafa do. So there is that. Though I do like some of the things Bill Hader was able to incorporate in here. Like, he gets to throw a few impressions in, which is Richie's whole thing anyway, so it's perfect. And then there's something that's a little bit more obscure, and that's when they decide one of the ways to get to Pennywise and shrink him down is to just go after him with the insults. The way he did them, the mocking and the taunting and all that, and it's like, just do it back to him. Because that's what really hurts him. And Bill Hader pulls out sloppy bitch, which, if you ever saw a Conan interview where Hader talked about how he can't play video games, because when GoldenEye came out on Nintendo 64, he would throw the controller and just scream sloppy bitch at the guy, and he had no idea why that was his go-to insult. So the fact that he, like, somehow incorporated that into this movie, is funny to me, especially with, the range that Hader has to have in this role. Like, it obviously isn't just we talked about this with Harry Anderson in the miniseries, how it's not necessarily just the comedy relief. He can be very funny, but you also see the fear in him through that comedy and how that's his defense mechanism. But then he also gets a ton of like emotional beats here, and it's so sort of like Bill Hader starting to be in roles like this is like as amazing as it is unexpected, or as unexpected as it is amazing. Either way you want to put that. So this is like, if this is the kind of direction he wants to go, like really balancing his comedy with how serious he can get so convincingly, I'm all for that. Because if you've seen any of the videos I've done on this channel at all, you know that I've just been constantly praising Bill Hader whenever his name comes up. So yes, I am all for Bill Hader getting big work like this. And then there's even the moment especially that I said was they almost kind of copped out on in the miniseries, and that's the idea of them having to leave Eddie behind after he's killed. And the thing about that is this relationship with Eddie that he has, where they have to like it's one thing, like in the book, I believe he like just sort of succumbs to it after some fighting, and then he just gives him that kiss goodbye, and then they go. And in the miniseries, he's the one that carries him out. But the real emotion in this scene where they have to like the whole time. Like, he never succumbs to it. They have to physically pull Richie all the way out of the sewer and out of the house to get him, to convince him that Eddie is gone and they can't do anything about it. And that it's still sticking with him when they're out, and he like breaks down in the water. It's like a whole emotional thing, and so that brings in the whole Richie being gay thing, which there are some people that are like, oh, that seems out of nowhere, but then there are a lot of people that definitely knew it was coming because it had been like, I guess you could say it had been like a fan fiction thing, because I think I heard Hader say in an interview that King told him that was never really the idea, despite, the kiss goodbye and the way they'd, bicker back and forth, but like in an endearing way. It doesn't feel necessarily too out of nowhere, and I think the way the movie handles it is well done. Another thing that I think makes it seem like it's not that out of place is the Adrian Mellon whole thing, where it's like, if anything, the Adrian Mellon thing would almost seem out of place, but when you add the Richie thing to it, it's like the fact that both of them coexist does make it feel like there's a connection here, and it's almost like there was sort of the foreboding of, we saw like the kind of stuff that can happen to people like Adrian Mellon, and then why should Richie be gay? That's what a massive fear of his would be. Whether it be, I mean, that's a whole thing. It could be, there violent reactions like what happened to Adrian Mellon, or there could just be the coming to terms with it and understanding himself. There's a whole fear angle to that that we go. And I think the fact that the movie doesn't totally and completely spell it out in that way might make people make people feel like it seems pointless or shoehorned in or whatever. But I think it works here when you look at all the different things going on here. And then you look at, now that we've addressed the fact that Eddie does indeed die, as he does in every other variation of the story, I'm trying to remember for sure, but I noticed this when I saw the first movie, like, in the theater, and I wondered if it was intentional or not. How we have the Losers Club here, there's 7, the Lucky 7, obviously, and then we lose Stan to his suicide, and then we eventually lose Eddie in the sewer when they're adults. And if I remember correctly, when they're all standing in the circle at the end of the first movie, and they all sort of sporadically leave until it's just Bill and Bev, it's Stan that leaves first, just like he was the first to die, and then Eddie's the second to walk away, because Eddie's the second one that died. I don't know if that's exactly how it happens in the first movie, or if that's just my memory, and if that's intentional, but if it is, that's a really, really nice touch also. So yes, and then there is the whole Audra thing. With Tom, I can kind of understand. I meant to address this in the miniseries videos, and I forgot. But the whole idea of the whole Tom thing being deleted, where he like goes after her and like beats the shit out of her friend and interrogates her to find out where she is. Then he goes there. Then he's like sees the deadlights. He's taken over by Pennywise. He's the one that takes Audra, and then it's just like, oh, by the way, he died. It's like he saw the deadlights and his head exploded or something. And it's like, it's the fact that we don't necessarily need that much to get Audra taken made sense that you cut down Tom's storyline. It's just she leaves him the end. And I think it helps in this movie too that it doesn't make him seem like he's deadly. It just makes it seem like he's an abusive douchebag. And all it'll really take is for her to, beat the shit out of him and leave her ring behind. But to kind of delete the whole Audra thing from this, where she's not taken down in the sewers, Bill doesn't have to rescue her, Bill doesn't have to beat the devil to bring her back. It does feel like there's something missing there, especially with Bill's arc, where he has to beat the devil a second time. But I can also see it from a standpoint where they did add in the first movie where Bev is taken and they have to bring her out of it. And it's like, maybe it would have been a bit too redundant. But at the same time, would it have also been fitting, because the whole point is that Audra is like the doppelganger of Bev. And it would have kind of been an intentional mirror, but I guess they thought they had enough going on in the climax as it is, so they just pretty much took Audra out completely. She has like one scene where she does not seem to be a particularly good fit for Bill. Which is also interesting because that's the whole sweetness of there was a love triangle with Bill, Ben, and Bev. So it's like it feels good that Ben and Bev get together, and because we don't have to feel bad for Bill because he's very happily married, and the whole thing is like, even though there is the sex scene in the book between Bill and Bev that they can't help but have because they just become overcome with it. But there's still this love that Bill has for Audra that keeps him going and gets him into the sewer and like through the whole climax, and then gives him the big moment when he beats it again. Just to kind of delete that entirely does feel like we're taking a lot away from Bill, especially since we took away his potential redemption with the kid getting killed at the fair. So Bill kind of got the shit into the stick in this movie, but come to think of it. But still, I think just being able to defeat him, and he does have the standoff with himself that does make him come to terms with the whole Georgie thing, which is a really kind of surreal scene to see his younger self and his current self like putting the Mike's gun to each other's head. That is a really kind of cool scene, the way that plays out, and the way he ends up with the Georgie puppet on his own hand. So there is stuff. So, but yeah, they kind of balance it out a little bit. So yeah, and then we get to the final scene with Stan's letter, which is a big change. And it does sort of take away kind of the scary factor of like the effect that it has on them and just how traumatizing it is for them. But what I do kind of think they're doing here is it's almost like the people adapting this version sort of have enough sort of like, love for these characters that they wouldn't want something that terrible to happen to any of them. And it's like there's something so horrific about what happens to this friend group that one of them does that despite the bond that they had. So you could probably call it a cop-out where it's not like Stan doesn't do the writing it on the wall and blood thing, and it's revealed that he didn't do it because his memories came back and it was too much to handle, and there was no way he was ever going to go back, or let alone face coming to those memories coming back. It was his whole explanation that he has, and it's like the main thing I took away from that was that they didn't want anything that dire to be the end of one of the losers, which obviously we get the Eddie thing, but I think we're kind of now we vicariously have Eddie through Richie because of the direction that went when we see him on the kissing bridge recarving the letters and all that. So yeah, so I can see from that standpoint. So all in all, I can see how people will be underwhelmed by this, and yeah, it's not as good as the first. I could go as far as say it's not near as good as the first, but I do like it a lot, and I like some of the liberties they took. I did like a lot of the ways they adapted things, some of the things they added, and like I said, adding the helplessness of like Bill supposedly getting a redemption and then totally not. But yeah, there's still some stuff in the book that I would like to see adapted to screen. Like I've always wanted to see the storm during the climax, where it's the big thing that where the Pennywise's reign always starts and ends with something, it's in mass death. And they didn't really go into the whole... I guess I do kind of like... they could have gone into the whole... It is actually female, and there were the eggs and all that, and it's like... The giant spider is like the best it could do for a final form, so that's what it did. The fact that it's just another form of Pennywise. Like I said, we kind of get a glimpse of it in the first movie when like one leg comes out or a couple of legs come out. But then when he just kind of goes full spider, but he's also Pennywise, and it's like, it feels like we're not cheated out of the Pennywise form, which is what is the appeal to a lot of people of this monster, that he's a clown. And a lot of people didn't like that we sacrificed Tim Curry for a spider puppet in the miniseries. So the fact that they give us both, I do like. And I think people are going to criticize how they beat Pennywise. I actually really like how they beat Pennywise, where they added where they do both of it. They do the whole thing I was talking about, where it's like where I was talking about how in the book they all are going to have to split up. where Ben takes care of the eggs and Bev stays with Eddie, and it's only Bill and Richie going after it physically. And I like what the miniseries did because it was all the remaining losers going on in on it at once, and this one does the same thing, where it's all four of them, and it's not only the sort of psychological thing where they can manipulate it just as it manipulates them and everything around it, and like make him small and then just give him the taste of everything he's ever done to any of them in regards to the taunting and the manipulating and all that, and literally make him small enough that they can just rip his heart out and all four of them bring him to an end at once. I think that works really, really well, actually. But I can see where the criticism might be, but I've got no problems with that. So, I do think that is about all I can really say about this. There is, I do think I was prepared to be like really emotional coming out of this thing, which I'm not really, because it doesn't quite touch on things as far as closing up in the way that the book did, because the book is like, I have like, ever since I turned 20, going on 9 years ago, I've pretty much been in a constant state of existential dread, that I'm battling every single day, as time goes on. So that's probably actually why you would think it would take me away from it. That's actually why I think the book It attracts me so much, and why I always keep going back to it. And when you think about the way, like, there's something so, like, you almost forget you're reading a horror book when you get to like the last 30 or 40 pages of the book, when it's just talking about the way they go their separate ways and they kind of slowly forget each other. And it's like it really starts to make you like not just miss your childhood, but the people you knew at that time and the people that have gone on to God knows what. Some may have disappeared off the face of the earth or whatever. I've heard a lot of people that I knew in childhood think I've disappeared off the face of the earth. And you read that and it's like there's this definite sadness, but there's also like a gratitude that, like, because of the book and because King told this story, even if they forget each other, we get to remember these characters. You know what I mean? And so it's like, and then there's the whole thing of like you usually discover this story in your childhood. Like you're usually like I was like probably 10 or so. I know a lot of like people say they read the book and when they were like still in school, and then they see the miniseries or something the way I did. They see like a clown horror movie and they're like, oh, we'll see what this is, and you don't expect that this is the kind of thing that it is. And so it's like you start this story in your childhood, you get to know the miniseries, you get to know the book, and then you go back to it as an adult, and it's like just holding the book like in my hand, because I've had it for so long since childhood, it sort of takes me back to that. And so when you read it again and you go through that whole existential journey, and then you go through them like talking about growing old and growing apart and growing away from each other, and it's like you feel like you're kind of back where you were when you're reading it, and then when you close the book and remember that you're an adult, the book hits like more than ever, and I was kind of hoping the movie would find a way to kind of get those feelings out of us and go a little more into that. But at the same time, you can hear audience members getting antsy, when it looks like they might be a closing shot, and then we get another closing shot. But it's like, I just kind of wanted it to keep going because I wanted to kind of get that feel. But naturally, they had to rush it because of a runtime and because audiences can't sit the fuck still. They can binge watch Netflix for 8 hours a day, but sitting in a theater for 3 hours is beyond comprehension. So. Yeah. But that's how I feel about this story as a whole, and I am really satisfied of this cinematic adaptation. Talking about the two movies, I did hear the director wants to combine both movies into like a 5-hour movie. I will definitely watch that for sure, and so. Yeah, I'm wondering if it'll be in chronological order, or if he'll re-edit it into like chronological order, or if it'll be just the way it is, just spliced together, or maybe all the deleted scenes will be put back in. Whatever. I'll see what that is. I hope they stick to doing it. So, yeah. So I think that's going to be it for this. So next week, I know I was so amped up for this. I don't even know what the hell else comes out this month. Ad Astra's coming soon. I think the Goldfinch and something else are like next week. So, you know, we'll see. And then when October gets here, we'll have the whole a bunch of horror verses like we usually do. I'll be doing another review video for tomorrow that's like the farewell, and then the fall and all that other stuff I saw like a week or two ago. Hopefully, I remember it enough. And then another verses after that. And then, yeah, so that'll be this weekend anyway, and then whatever Owen or Ashley have planned or whatever. So, yeah, so I'm going to end this here. So until then, I think that's it for